Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Why would a property provider renovate a home and sell it to an investor like you, maybe even for less than they would sell it to an owner-occupant? Then what is perhaps the most underappreciated real estate market in all of America, even though it's right in the heart of cash flow country, today on Get Rich Education? Finally, with Total Control Financial, get checkbook control of your existing 401k and IRA funds to invest in real estate. Yes, you can move your retirement money into your own checking account, but you must avoid the little-known tax that you'll get hammered with in a self-directed IRA. Instead, start your QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Thanks so much for being here, but you're not here for me. You're here for you. When a real estate provider or real estate flipper needs to attract a buyer for that appetizing new or freshly renovated property, they often prefer to entice a buyer that's an investor and not an owner-occupant family that might be more emotional about the purchase, because investors like you're often ready to buy a property now. You want your deal to close right away so that you can enjoy the benefits. That's different than a family that wants to make that property their primary residence. You know what kind of offers they make. It's quite common for their purchase offer to include contingencies, the most common one being that they aren't ready to buy another home for themselves until they can sell their existing home first, that home that they're still living in now, so that they can get the equity out of that and roll it into their down payment for this subject buy. Well, for a prospective seller, that turnkey provider or flipper, they have holding costs of financing and they're paying property taxes and insurance and utilities and everything else. Time is of the essence and time is money. They'd rather sell sooner. So that's just one of many reasons that these providers prefer to sell to faster moving investors like you rather than owner-occupant types. We're going to discuss even more reasons for why real estate providers prefer to sell to investors with our guest in just a few minutes here. When you buy an income-producing property, what you're really doing is that you're making an investment into the underlying economy of that area. That's really where your income originates. Your property, then, is a conduit that helps secure that income stream for you. And that's why we put so much emphasis on market analysis here. And that's why investors who focus only on the deal, meaning crunching numbers on the property itself, but fail to underwrite the market, they can sometimes end up in a mess. The context of a deal is that macro environment, things like interest rates, taxes, and energy costs, and they are the things that affect everybody out there. And then after that are those regional factors. We're talking about things like job sectors, local tax rates, landlord law, and supply and demand balance. Only after those things that I just mentioned check out, you, and you're probably doing this through your team that has their boots on the ground, through them, you then go to the street level and start looking for a deal that makes sense by the numbers. And that's because a strong market will help lift up a marginal deal, while a weak market can suck the life out of what even appears to be a good deal. So market selection really matters. Now, in a sense, that is rather easy to say, but figuring markets out can be a bit of a challenge. So what you can do is that you can cheat. When you were a kid in school, it was frowned upon to sneak a peek at the smart kid's homework. But in the real world of real estate investing, this is actually a preferred practice. And we've got a lot of good market information in the United States. Remember, analyzing a market is really about economic activity. And even if you're exclusively in an affordable housing sector and your target tenant doesn't make $300,000 per year, keep in mind that high-paying jobs in an area can create a ripple effect. That's because a six-figure medical worker spends a chunk of their income at local businesses on things like restaurants, healthcare, automobile needs, entertainment, and all those sorts of things. So it's that trickle-down effect. In fact, as Amazon claimed during their highly publicized hunt for HQ2 a year or two ago, each high-paying job creates an additional 4 to 5 jobs in the local market. My point is that tracking a sector like healthcare can be a really good gauge of local economic vibrancy, and that's no matter what type of real estate you're investing in, because healthcare jobs run the gamut. You can have high-paid doctors and anesthesiologists to low-paid assistants, not to mention that medical is a growing sector in itself. And when you're a well-informed, strategic real estate investor, you can dramatically improve your odds of success simply by being attentive to market selection. And that's what a lot of beginning investors miss. And actually, that's even what a lot of investors foreign to the United States miss. Now, foreign investors, they often focus on New York, Boston, San Francisco, and gateway cities like that. And while these might appear as relatively safe places to invest, they're also attracting the most capital. That runs prices up, and therefore resultant returns are low. Foreigners might invest in New York City even if they know that returns are low because they've heard of New York City and they perceive the United States to be a more stable economy than whatever less stable nation they're moving their funds out of. Oftentimes, foreigners are not chasing yield. They're seeking a store of value in these major metro coastal markets. There are a lot of markets across the U.S. that are substantially more attractive to you, but yet they're less known to outsiders. Think of places like Boise, Idaho, Memphis, Tennessee, North and Central Florida, and Alabama, and Indiana, and Ohio markets, just to name a few. Really, in this case, you're not following the money into places that are overpriced, but you're more so following that market data. The market that we're talking about today is really somewhat of a secret market. It's got a substantial population of nearly 1 million people in the MSA now, but it stays off the radar because of its proximity to better known places. Now, 2020 is a census year. Since the last census in 2010, demographers expect the total U.S. population to increase by 8%, up to more than 333 million people. That's what the estimated population of the United States is now. Well, then, of course, within that 8% national population gain over the last decade, that's differential. There are winners and there are losers within that. The place we're talking about today is really emblematic of the domestic migration pattern of Americans moving from high-cost, high-tax coastal places to low-cost, lower-tax inland places. Now, recently, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, has been replaced, and we've now moved on to the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. Many point out that there are elements to this new act that are going to benefit economies in the United States heartland. Much of that remains to be seen, though. Let's talk about a cash-flowing market that's off the radar. But first, why property providers prefer selling to investors over owner-occupants. Eric is on the show with me today. He had previously worked with a large multifamily company for 10 years, but for years now, he, much like me, has seen the opportunity in the rental single-family home space. And in this capacity, he's worked with investors throughout the United States and around the globe, too, in places like Canada, France, Switzerland, Iran, and Japan. He is an expert in what it takes to produce residual income for real estate investors, and he's worked a lot in the property management world as well. Eric, welcome to Get Rich Education.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I think that sometimes a buyer of turnkey single-family homes wonders, now I wonder why this real estate company doesn't sell this available property to an owner-occupant instead, like a family that's going to both own the property and live inside it. Maybe you, the listener, even wondering, would the real estate company, would they be able to get a little more money from an owner that occupies the property? Because that buyer wouldn't need to make the numbers work. And that owner-occupant buyer might get emotions behind their purchase and therefore drive up the sale price a little bit. But I know that that's often not true. So, Eric, tell us more about your niche and why you offer property to the typically out-of-state investor rather than that local owner-occupant.
That is a really great question, Keith. The first thing is really that this company was founded, Freedom Real Estate Group was founded by Dania and Flip specifically for investors. They love the idea of working with investors to help investors like themselves be able to build a portfolio of cash flowing passive income. And so it's in our motto, it's on our website, company built for investors by investors. That is what we're all about. So we love to develop a long-term relationship with our investors, be able to be here for them if they have questions or even bumps in the road or even questions about other markets. We're here and we're all about education. So we're here and open to answer, those questions, have those conversations. And with the retail market or owner occupant, we can't really establish those long-term relationships. It's more of a transaction. It's very singular. Whereas with our investors, we have an average of 2 or more properties per investor with some well over 10 doors. Our in-house property management too continues that relationship, continues to provide that great service, and then that keeps investors investing in our market and investing with us.
Because that owner-occupant, how primary residence dwellers live and behave, they might buy a home and then 11 years later buy a move-up home. Well, it's not very easy for you to go out and have to find a new buyer over and over again. From your perspective, investors tend to buy more properties. The other thing is that owner-occupants that are looking for a primary residence, they can be really picky. They might say something like, well, this home almost works, but I think the kitchen countertop should be lighter and brighter. So they get that emotion behind it, or the sun doesn't come in the window in the morning the right direction. Or there will even be things that can drive traditional agents nuts, like when a prospective buyer says, we're not going to buy this entire $200,000 home because our $400 sofa wouldn't fit in the living room just right, so we're going to pass. So investors aren't so picky. If the numbers work, the emotions are largely removed.
Yeah. I'm a realtor as well, and I worked with a buyer one time. Everything matched their preferences in a home, but they refused to buy it because a room was painted red. And I, told them, I'll come over on Saturday and paint this room, and they wouldn't touch it. As you said, buyers can be super picky about the weirdest things. And for an investor, it's more about, do the numbers work? It's very black and white. Either it's a yes or a no. Not only that, but investors see and understand the value, and the investors we work with and the investors that listen to this podcast are educated, they're savvy, and they know what they're looking for. So it's much easier to be able to see if we're a fit right away and then be able to find them a great investment.
One reason that you got into this space at all is just due to that overall recession resistance of smaller multifamily properties and single-family rental homes. So tell us more about that recession resistance and part of what's attracted you in this space for the long term.
With traditional stocks, you have very big ups and downs. It's like a roller coaster. You've got an up, and then you're going to eventually have to go down, maybe a small hill, maybe a big hill, but you're going to have that low moment. Where we invest and where a lot of turnkey operations are in boring markets. And I say boring in a good way. It means we don't have those large swings. We don't have that big hill to climb and then that even bigger hill to fall. We sort of stay steady and float along. We may have some dips, we may have some increases, but we're pretty boring in all the right ways. It's less volatile whenever a recession does happen. Even in a recession, there's always going to be someone wanting to rent. So owner-occupied buyers may sort of decrease when a recession happens. Financing tightens up. Maybe they're a little scared, a little timid to move, but there are always going to be people wanting to rent. Between 2006 and 2014, 50 of the largest metro areas saw an increase in renters. So there were more people turning to renting properties versus buying. And I myself, being in that property management background, we saw tons of people right after the recession happened to now 2009, 2010, unfortunately, maybe losing their home, the only option they have is to rent. Rentals can actually pick up in demand in a recession, which is fantastic. And not only that, but for an investor, you have those fixed costs, and fixed is sort of a loose term, but your principal and interest, if you're financing, taxes, which could even decrease, maybe, not all the time, but it could decrease in a little bit of a recession, a little dip. But management fees are fixed. So you have sort of those fixed fees on your investment, while potentially the rent could increase. So your return could actually go up. Not only that, but a recession is a great time to buy. So if property values have even dropped a bit, you could still be looking at the same rental amount with a lower purchase price than a year or two prior. It's really a great opportunity for an investor to be able to purchase a property versus owner occupants. They're maybe not moving as much whenever we see those recessions and those dips.
That's right. In general, an investor gets more cash flow year after year, even on an inflation adjusted basis, because rents generally tend to go up with inflation. And then on those investors' expenses, well, the mortgage and taxes, you mentioned sometimes the taxes could go down, but in general, they might go up with about inflation. But your biggest payment as an investor, your principal and interest remains fixed. So that's why you have that increasing delta between your income and your expenses over time, and why it becomes more profitable for you. Eric, I love that you use the word boring, because in a sense, I think that real estate investing is somewhat boring, and it should be somewhat boring on the day-to-day basis. But when you know long-term you're getting paid up to 5 ways simultaneously, it actually is more exciting than someone that's checking their eToro app minute per minute to see what the cryptocurrency price is doing, and someone considers that exciting. We're talking about what's profitable long-term here. So that's why boring in the short term really is pretty exciting over the long term.
Yep, absolutely. And if you're looking to retire early or retire even in 20 years and that's part of your plan, you probably don't want to invest in something that may be super exciting and has those highs and lows. Something boring that's consistent is probably going to be the safer bet to go.
Yeah, I'm looking for boring, at least for that stable part of my portfolio, which is that greatest part. So talk to us some more about selling to owner occupants versus investors, and why investors might want to buy a property. Any other reasons?
Versus selling to owner occupants, flipping itself, and flipping and selling to owner occupants versus selling to an investor is a much more involved process. So for an investor, you're going to have to continue reinvesting, being active, finding the next deal that you're going to flip and put on the market. In down markets, whenever you're flipping, that could lead to higher holding costs. So you've got more utility bills that you're paying for, longer tax durations. If you've got a loan out on that project, then you're paying higher interest rates on that. Whereas for an investor, you have that long-term relationship with the turnkey company, which is what we're all about. And then also you've got tax incentives. I'm sure there's a whole podcast out there specifically on the tax benefits of buy and hold investing. And for investors that are doing flips, those just don't exist as much as for a buy and hold investor.
Yeah, versus someone getting into flipping, there's clearly greater passivity in the buy and hold, but there's also greater stability. Like you mentioned, a flipper's cash flow can be all over the place, and they're actually more subject to the whims and the changes in the market and the capital value of that asset than a long-term buy and hold real estate investor is. So you're insulated from that as a long-term buy and hold real estate investor. It sounds a little corny, but really what out-of-state investors are doing is they are helping improve America one home and one neighborhood at a time. So tell us how you essentially help investors do that.
It's sort of the warm fuzzy that we have, and it's for our investors that are investing, but also for us as a company, because we are taking these properties that we find in good B and C class neighborhoods. We're taking maybe a distressed home or a home that needs repair, but the owner can't afford it and maybe needs to move. We're taking these properties and bringing them back to life in neighborhoods that are in demand for renters. Everyone needs a place to live, whether they're going to be renting. They may not be in a position to buy. It may not fit their lifestyle. So we're able to go into these neighborhoods where there are great opportunities, they're great neighborhoods, and turn them around, give them a facelift. There's some communities in certain parts of our market that we're investing in where every other house we're actually purchasing and totally changing the image of the street, which has been really positive. We've had homeowners even in those neighborhoods go up to our rehab crews and say, "I'm so glad you're here. You're making it look so much better." So it's just a nice sort of intrinsic benefit that we're bringing up the appeal of these neighborhoods. And long term, looking at it, you're also making these neighborhoods more attractive for people to move to. And then it's increasing employers that are coming to the market and employers that are moving to the city because the city itself is looking better. And you're also getting longer term tenants that are staying in these neighborhoods because they are improving and looking better than they have before.
That's right. So it really floats a lot of boats at the same time. As a long-term buy and hold investor, we want to be interested in demographic trends. Demographics are a long-term phenomenon in themselves. Really, I think, Eric, that a lot of millennials and Gen Zers, they still do desire home ownership, but just not as great a proportion as there used to be. Fewer people desire to be a homeowner than they did 10 or 20 years ago. And there are a few reasons for that I have in mind. What are your thoughts?
There's actually an interesting stat about that. Apartmentlist.com, which is a national website that promotes multifamily properties, single-family properties, all kinds of stuff. They did a survey just last year in November that said 1 in 5 millennials plans to rent forever, not just temporarily, but forever.
Yeah.
So I know it's only 1 in 5, but that is a big change from years ago when it was only maybe 1 in 10. So there's a little bit of a change in the winds towards especially younger people for multiple reasons. Student loan debt is a little bit higher than it used to be, so it takes longer to save up a down payment.
Right.
More and more millennials are looking at jobs that move them around the country and transfer them. So they may not want to deal with buying a house and only staying for 2 years. Also, sort of the old adage of I'm going to get a job and stick with that company for 20 years died a few years ago. Younger people now more than ever are staying with a job for 1 year and then they're moving on to the next thing, which may be in a different city. So the renting lifestyle fits better for a lot of younger people for multiple reasons. And that is a great opportunity for investors because someone is going to rent those properties. We want it to be our investors.
That's right. And when you're young and enterprising as a millennial or a Gen Zer, that mobility that renting gives you is really an asset on your resume, if you will. And home ownership, it constrains mobility. And when it comes right down to it, when you add up all the expenses, you got to look at more than the monthly payment. Oftentimes, it does make more sense being a renter than being a homeowner. Paying rent is not the same as throwing money away. A lot of people don't believe that or haven't heard that yet, but there are more that believe in that now than there used to be. Eric and I are going to come back and talk more. You're listening to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Countless property investors get killed with maintenance costs, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction, turnkey rental properties. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, go to newconstructionturnkey.com. The company that's provided our listeners with more loans than anyone is Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. You can finance more than 10 single families up to fourplexes. Serving most U.S. states, their knowledge and experience leads to your financial freedom. They're number one in the investment space. Pre-qualify and then chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. Start on your next investment property loan right now at ridgelendinggroup.com.
Hey everybody, this is Matt Bowles from Maverick Investor Group. You're listening to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
You're listening to the show that's created more financial freedom for busy people just like you. This is Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Eric and I are talking about the benefits of long-term buy and hold real estate investing, including some aspects you may not have thought about before. Eric, I know, interestingly, you live in a metro that is extremely advantageous for out-of-the-area real estate investors. Oftentimes, you can still get that 1% rent-to-price ratio or higher in that market, and yet you're not in a tiny market. As prices run up, like we've had, rents oftentimes don't keep up proportionally, especially in some of these bigger cities where that's happened, like Dallas and Atlanta and Phoenix, where it's been more challenged to get rent income. A lot of times what we do is we might see investors go out into a tertiary market that only has 8 or 10,000 people in that community. That's not even a suburb, but it's just their own community. And I think there's a lot of risk in chasing yield in really small markets because the market being more important than the property. Well, now that small market of 8 or 10,000 people might just be tied to one industry or the zinc mine on the edge of town or something like that. So I think that's one mistake that investors make as prices run up. But you're in a market where you still get that high ratio of rent income to purchase price, and it's not a small market, and you've lived there 14 years yourself. So tell us about it.
Dayton, Ohio is the market that we're in. And you sort of hit the nail on the head with the 1%. Most of our properties, I would say at least 95% of my properties are at least getting the 1%.
That's outstanding.
Rent to value or higher. And those are in good B and C class areas. We're not dipping into D class neighborhoods by any means or war zones to get those values. And we certainly do pass up quite a few deals because they don't match that. And we want to make sure we're finding really great investments for our investors. So one of our key indicators is finding properties that are going to be able to hit that 1% rent to value. Now, there are some that are just slightly below, but I've never had anything below a 0.92. So we're still having a pretty good track record there, even for the few that don't meet it all the way.
And I think what's interesting is that Dayton has an MSA population of 800,000 people. And most of the nation doesn't realize that because, it's funny. We brought up the term boring before. Dayton just doesn't make the headlines like flashy places like New York, Miami, or Los Angeles does. So it kind of stays off the radar, but yet you've got significant ballast with all of your market drivers and all of your business sectors there.
Yeah, and we super benefit from being cushioned in between three much larger metro areas. So we are cushioned between Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Indianapolis just off to our west.
Great point.
So we also are able to get some of sort of that residual benefits from some of those larger markets. And also Columbus and Cincinnati themselves continue to grow farther toward Dayton because we are slightly smaller metro area than them. So we're sort of gaining, we have residents that, the husband may live in Dayton in one of our properties and works in Cincinnati, and the wife works in Columbus. So Dayton's a perfect halfway point. So we are seeing a lot of those benefits from those larger markets as well.
Tell us about that diversity of industry there in Dayton, where you're positioned pretty much in between Columbus, which is in the center of Ohio, and Cincinnati, which is in southwestern Ohio.
The largest sort of staple here in our market is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It is a research-based Air Force base that has over 30,000 employees. That doesn't include all the contracts that they have with area tech companies, area research engineering companies that are located around the base. That doesn't necessarily include all of those people that they also employ. We have two major healthcare networks. The number 2 children's hospital is just right down the road in Cincinnati. Right. We have a lot of blue collar, AK Steel, Fayou Glass, which Fayou Glass is a manufacturing company for automobiles. They produce glass, and they just announced an expansion in Dayton last month. So that's even going to be another 500 to 1,000 jobs coming to a facility that they're opening as well. And GM even just made an announcement about bringing back a facility to Dayton. We haven't been untouched by Amazon. Within 45 minutes, we have 3 fulfillment centers, which has been very great for the area. And then Dayton City Council has just announced their 5-year plan. And one of the biggest factors and most important things they're focusing on is expanding the industry and including international growth in that as well.
Now, the county that you occupy there, Warren County, that's really seen substantial growth compared to some of the other nearby areas.
Yeah, Warren County in 2018, I haven't researched the stats fully for 2019 yet, but for 2018, it was the fastest growing county in the entire state of Ohio. And that's because of its position right between Dayton and Cincinnati. And then also it's sort of the northeast corner goes a bit toward Columbus. So we're seeing a lot of benefit from that. And it's a hot area. It's where a lot of people are wanting to move. A lot of people are wanting to be because of its location to those metro markets that we're in.
So between this sort of overall burgeoning interest in rental single-family homes that we have now and the fact that Dayton's right for it, that actually brought your company's owners from Arizona. They moved from Arizona to Dayton. And tell us more about your team there and how you live and you work and you all even invest in that market yourself.
The co-founders, They've been investing in real estate for a while, and they actually lived in Arizona prior. They got connected with some investors in the Dayton and Cincinnati market and heard about the amazing opportunity here. So I think it was within a matter of like 30 days, they decided to move, packed up in a U-Haul and moved to Dayton, Ohio, because that's where the opportunity was. But yeah, all of our team, we have a team of contractors, plumbers, electricians. We have multiple realtors on our team. It's like total 85 years of experience on our team in the real estate industry, property management team. The list goes on there, but we actually are investing, buying in the neighborhoods. We live in these neighborhoods that we're buying in. All our team is local. We're not investing remotely or anything like that. So we truly believe in not only the market to raise our families in, but also the market for investing as well.
If you want to learn more about the market as an investor and how you can get in on a property, Eric put a report for you there at getricheducation.com/Dayton. So you can check that out, read about the market, read about the rehabs, read about the team, and connect with them at getricheducation.com/Dayton. But Eric, first I want to ask you more about what are your rehab standards like there when you rehabilitate a single family home that's in an investor advantage area for an out-of-state investor. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we're installing, looking at cosmetic items, we're installing LVT or LVP, the luxury vinyl tile, flooring throughout the main living areas, living room, dining room, kitchen, bathroom. We're also doing white shaker-style cabinets, backsplashes in the kitchen because backsplashes are just a great feature to get renters in, especially younger renters. It's just one of those jazzy features that, gets them excited.
100%. And tell us about the numbers. You told us a bit that you're in a B or a C class neighborhood. You avoid those lower end neighborhoods, but you also avoid the high end neighborhoods because the numbers don't quite work there. So what are the price ranges and the actual rent incomes that you end up getting in these homes?
Yeah, so our price ranges right now are somewhere between $75,000 up to $125,000.
Okay.
And those are for our single family properties. Rents for those same properties are somewhere between $750 up to $1,300. So again, it's like right around that 1% rent to value.
You also have an as-is program for investors. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that is something new that we're rolling out. And it is a great opportunity for an investor who might want to have a little bit of equity built into their purchase. So for example, we had a gentleman recently. He was a little bit older of age. He had owned this rental property for quite some time and just needed the money for, personal medical reasons and wanted to get rid of the property. So we looked at it. He had, just installed a furnace a year ago. The roof was new only 3 years ago. It had been, maintained immaculately. So, at the price he wanted to sell it, we do not have the cushion in there to go in and rip out all of this good stuff to put in new. It just doesn't make sense either. And plus the tenant had been there for 8 years and they had no intention of moving, which is like awesome.
Yeah.
So what we're able to do now is whenever we do run across those opportunities, we would like to present them to any of our investors saying, hey, here's a property. It's got a tenant in place. It may not have the white cabinets that we put in, but they're great cabinets. Mechanicals are newer. It's a rent-ready property and already cash flowing. And ideally, let's say that property was worth $100,000, we would sell it for $85,000. So you would even have a little bit of that equity built in. And then you would also be able to have our rehab team go in and do any upgrades if there ever was a turn down the road where the tenant moved out.
Okay, so in that alternative case, the alternative to Turnkey, which is your main business, in that as-is program, that way you already buy with a tenant in place, but there are going to be some rehab costs that investor is going to have to do in the nearer term rather than the long term, like what one would expect with a turnkey rental.
Right. Potentially there could be maybe, in 3 to 5 years, there might be something you want to, a capital expense that you want to work on, or maybe a replacement of a water heater, something like that. Whereas with the turnkey properties, you should be set for quite some time on some of those bigger expenses. But it does create an opportunity to get some properties in some nice neighborhoods. And we can't buy them for our turnkey model, but we would love to pass them on to our investors if there's interest for them.
So in your turnkey model, just tell us what you do as far as new roof, or you'll keep a roof there if it's still fairly new, and HVACs and water heater, so that the turnkey buyer doesn't have those near-term CapEx expenses. Tell us about what you do there.
Yeah, so for all of our roofs, mechanical items like furnace, air conditioner, water heater, we will have a plumber or an HVAC technician or even a roofer go out and inspect those items and determine how much life is left. If there's at least 5 years of life left in those HVAC items, we're usually keeping them in place and servicing them. And that's as long as the HVAC technician can determine it's running well, because in these types of properties, you could have even a 3-year-old system that hasn't been maintained that we need to replace. So we're always double checking with a certified tech to make sure everything is running smoothly, everything's operational. Same with the roof, same with the water heater. And of course, if it is an issue, we replace it, but we also offer a 3-year warranty on those items. So 3 years from your close date, if for some reason you had an issue with the furnace or the roof or water heater, then we would take care of that at our expense. Even if it included replacement, we would do that.
Well, Eric, are there any last things that a prospective investor should know about either your turnkey model or your as-is model there in Investor Advantage Dayton?
Really, a great thing to do would be go to getricheducation.com/Dayton and just download the market information that we have. And from there, we can get together and have a conversation and just see if it's a great fit. If you're looking for a good B, C class property in a boring market, as maybe as bad as that sounds, but in a very good market, we may be a great option for you to diversify your portfolio.
Boring has never been more exciting. If this sounds interesting to you, go ahead and get that report that Eric's provided there for you at getricheducation.com/Dayton. That'll answer a lot of your preliminary questions and give you the contact information so that you can follow up and get some property under contract. Eric, it's been great having you back on the show.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, we're talking about a market, Dayton, that's boring in all the right ways. Even among Ohio cities, I think that among other attributes, it's the major pro sports teams that provide some other places with recognition and preeminence. The Cleveland Indians, Browns, Cavaliers, the Cincinnati Reds, Columbus's NHL team, even the Blue Jackets. Notice that the Cincinnati Bengals were not part of that group. I'm just having some fun here. My point is that it makes Dayton an underappreciated place, though there are 800,000 people in the metro area. And when you have a place this big, you do have your own history and distinction. Dayton is where the Wright brothers of aviation fame are from, for example. But really, Dayton is America's beating heart of cash flow country. Dayton has quite a few buildings downtown, between 20 and 30 stories in height. The top 2 employers in Dayton are both in the industry that's just about the number 1 most resilient and fastest growing business sector today, healthcare, with Premier Health Partners and Kettering Health Network. In Dayton, my take is that if national real estate appreciation rates really take off, that Dayton is generally going to lag behind that and have a lower appreciation rate than the national average. On the flip side, in the unlikely event that housing had a severe recession like it did in 2008, that Dayton is going to hold its value really well. Prices probably wouldn't fall as much as they would elsewhere. But Dayton, Ohio is a cash flow play. That's what you're in this for. I mentioned the domestic migration patterns earlier. Dayton is really emblematic of that domestic migration pattern of people moving from these high-cost, high-tax coastal places to low-cost, lower-tax inland places. Last week, I discussed in detail about the durability and reliability of real estate income streams long-term. Well, people are not going to stop needing an affordable place to live. The Dayton area, including those suburbs south of Dayton in Warren County and Middletown, where you find those top investor submarkets, housing costs are more than 50% below the national average. Just the national average. So that might mean they're 75% below some of those high-cost coastal places, or even more. Part of your due diligence is reading a bit about the market itself. Well, we've made that easy. That starts with the report that was put together for you at getricheducation.com/Dayton. They are actively sourcing properties there in Dayton. They aim to acquire 10 to 12 properties per month. It surely helps to get pre-approved for your mortgage loan right away, of course. Hopefully, you're pre-approved already. Next week here on the show, a prominent economist and I are going to help you see what's going to happen in the economy the next 3 years and how that's going to affect your investments and your own personal prosperity. In Dayton, if you want to get on the list so that they can inform you about available Dayton cash flow property, you can do that and get your due diligence report at the same time at getricheducation.com/Dayton. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.